Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar with the Retail Bakers of America. I am Marissa Sertatabili, RBA's Executive Director. For those who don't know us yet, the RBA, or Retail Bakers of America, is the National Association for Retail Bakers, as well as educators, cottage bakeries, allied members, and cake decorators from across the country. It is our mission to provide resources to help bakers achieve success, as well as build community throughout the industry. I am very, very excited to have Lasheeda Perry here with us today. Lasheeda is a powerhouse baker and pastry chef, also known as the Queen of Flavor. She has over 18 years experience in the industry, working at various high-end hotels and restaurants. She has also been a speaker on the celebrity stages at IBIE, the International Baking Industry Expo, which happens every 3 years in Las Vegas, the next event scheduled for September 2025. Most recently, Lasheeda opened her tasting room and retail location in Fort Walton Beach, Florida. Welcome, Chef. We are so excited to have you here. Thank you so much for being here.
Of course, thank you for having me, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. And so excited that you're talking about IBIE 2025 already.
Yeah, it's going to be here around the corner.
A few years ago when I attended, it was a lot of fun and a lot of great people, professionals came out. So quite sure 2025 is going to be just as great.
Yeah, and you've had some exciting developments too with your new store location. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. As you mentioned, I've been in the industry at this point about 20 years now.
Oh my goodness.
And I've done everything from hotels to small restaurants, to large restaurants, even television. And I've always wanted my a brick and mortar. I didn't know in what capacity years ago, but I was doing a wine tasting and I was like, a dessert tasting room would be phenomenal, just to go along with the wine or just to have a space where people can come and try unique desserts. And that's when I opened Queen of Flavor about 5 weeks ago now. I opened Queen of Flavor and I'm located in Fort Walton Beach, Florida. That's in the panhandle of Florida near Alabama, if you've never heard of it. Or you might have heard of Destin. Destin is about 15 minutes from me. So I'm really excited for this new chapter. And you guys are like the third virtual class that I've had. So I'm really, really excited.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah. And can you tell us what you're going to be producing for us today?
Yes, absolutely. I am going to be making pate choux, but not just your typical pate choux. Making it a little fun and quirky by shaping them into turtles. I know you're probably like, why would you do turtle pate choux? Long story short, I was doing some consulting in Maui a few years ago, and you see turtles everywhere. Like if you drive from Maui to Lahaina, you'll see traffic stopping because turtles are crossing the street. And someone threw a curveball at me. They're like, we need something really quick for a VIP guest. We don't want it to be a chocolate showpiece, just something they can really eat and enjoy. And I just remember seeing those turtles, and I was like, all right, let's make some cream puffs. So here we are. Today we're going to be making pate choux turtle cream puffs.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah. All righty. Shall we get started?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. And please, if you have any questions, whether it's related to pate choux or any baking and pastry related questions, please feel free to pick my brain. So first, we're going to start with the crackling topping. Crackling topping, I would say in the last 5, 6, maybe 7 years, I've seen crackling topping on almost every cream puff. I actually rarely see cream puffs that are dipped in a chocolate glaze. Not that anything's wrong with that, but I love how trends just fluctuate. And now crackling is definitely the go-to. Especially being here in Florida now, I love using the crackling topping. One, I don't have to worry about the chocolate glaze melting all over the place, getting sticky and stuff during transporting. But the crackling topping, it gives it a nice textural contrast as well. And also you can play with the flavor and the color of that crackling too. And that's why it's perfect for this turtle, because the chocolate crackling that I'm making, it's supposed to mimic the turtle shell. So I'm going to start with that with some salt and butter. I'm just going to do this by hand because it's such a small recipe. But do know if you're going to bulk it up, or you want to just make a lot, because crackling holds very well. You can roll it, cut it out, and keep it in the freezer for months. That's what I used to do when I was working in hotels. We would have all our crackling toppings punched out for our large ones, our mini ones, our medium ones. So do know, please, you can do it on a mixer, but this is a small batch. I'm starting with some unsalted butter here, and it's softened as well. I'm going to go ahead and add granulated sugar. And crackling recipes, I've seen several types where they have brown sugar in them. I've seen some that use all-purpose flour. I've seen some that use bread flour. At the end of the day, they all work. I just think it really depends on what works for your shop. For this specific recipe, though, I'm using granulated sugar, cake flour, and cocoa powder. So I just mix the butter and sugar until it's pretty cohesive. And now I'm going to add the cake flour as well as the cocoa powder. And at this time, left a little sugar in there. Should I get all of that? At this stage, you can add the cocoa powder and the cake flour all at once. Just make sure you mix it on low speed so it doesn't fly everywhere. And when it comes to the cocoa powder, for Halloween one year, I wanted it to be really black, like really intense black crackling. So I removed some of the cocoa powder and replace it with black cocoa powder. However, do not substitute the cocoa powder for all black cocoa powder. That can become really intense, because black cocoa powder, it's intense. It's really black. It has very, very bitter flavor. So I would say a ratio about 75% of the black cocoa and then 25% of the regular cocoa. And that's going to give it a nice natural black color. You don't have to worry about adding food coloring to it, because that black cocoa is so intense. I love using black cocoa, by the way. I love it, using it in recipes, especially like for my version of an Oreo. It works perfectly with that. And just as a natural food coloring as well. Okay, so I'm just going to mix this by hand. At first, it may not appear as if it's going to come together. Just give it a little elbow grease. And if I had this on the mixer, I would use a paddle attachment and it would come together really, really fast. And once it's fully incorporated, I'm going to place it between some parchment paper. You can use a silk pad if you like, but the goal is to roll it pretty evenly. So this is what I have so far. It's like a light brown color right now, but as it solidifies and chill in the fridge, the color will deepen a bit. But it's literally like a paste right now, pretty firm. Okay, and I just want to make sure all of those ingredients are fully incorporated. I don't want to see any butter streaks, no chunks of flour or cocoa powder. All right, that's looking pretty good.
There are
So
fans,
now I have a
fans
rolling.
here of your cute heart-shaped portion containers.
Thank you. So I have a full sheet of parchment paper. I'm gonna just fold it in half. And then I'm going to place all of this crackling on one half of the parchment paper. Once again, you can definitely bulk up on this. You would need to probably do a full sheet versus a half if you were. Making sure to get every little bit in here. Right?
Beth, if someone wanted to do a plain crackling topping that isn't chocolate, would they be able to substitute the cocoa powder with more cake flour, or is there a different formula for that?
To be honest, you can. However, I have a completely different recipe for that one. I tend to just have a chocolate one and then a neutral one. So I have two different recipes because I couldn't find a happy medium with what I was looking for when I added the cocoa powder. So I just created two different recipes. And I actually use brown sugar for the neutral one. I just feel as though it caramelizes better in the oven. It gives it a nice golden color that I'm looking for. And then that one, I can add matcha powder to it to make it green. Or you can use food coloring. I've used freeze dried fruits as well. I try not to use too much matcha or too much of the freeze dry because it does impact the amount of, it does impact the texture. But you have to ask yourself, are you going for flavor or are you going for color? If you're going for flavor when you're doing matcha and freeze dry, you have to add a lot, and that can really impact how it bakes. But if you're just going for a natural color, matcha is perfect for that. But I've done some where I was just going for color, then I wasn't worried about flavor because I knew the filling was going to give it nice flavor. Then I use a liquid gel food coloring.
Thank you.
Actually, I had a request the last Sunday. A guest wanted some cream puffs, but she wanted royal blue for the crackling and like a Kelly green. And they came out pretty nice. Really nice. All right. So now that I have my crackling here, I just like to jumpstart the process before I roll it because my biggest concern is like I'm gonna roll it all on the table. So I just try to get the shape going just by pressing it with my hands in the beginning. That way I'm just laying out the foundation as to it not um, seeping out into the sides. My goal is just to keep it in the parameter of this half sheet. However, my goal is not to make it the same size as the parchment paper because then you're rolling it too thin. And you don't have to worry about rolling it perfectly square or rectangle. I'll be honest, I don't find that that works for me unless I was maybe doing eclairs and I was doing more rectangular shapes, but I'm going to stamp these out. So if it's a little on the amoeba side, it's all right. And the cool part with crackling is that you can re-roll it however many times you want. I think I rolled one maybe 4 or 5 times. I was doing a big batch for a party in Minneapolis, and we were doing pink. And I'm telling you, that pink, I got my pink out of that for sure. I was re-rolling those scraps like crazy. All right, so I'm just gonna roll it out. And once again, the thickness, it's one of those thicknesses where you can't put a ruler to it. You know, if I was to say 1/16 of an inch, like getting 1/16 of an inch is pretty hard to measure. So it's one of those things where you just have to fill it. And that's another reason why I like using the half sheet parchment paper. Because if I know if I spread it to the circumference of the sheet is way too thin, I always tell myself it should cover about 3/4 of the sheet. Whether that's in a perfect square or not, it doesn't have to be, but you can just fill when it's too thick. And you can also fill and see when it's too thin. So I like to still use my hands, try to get it as smooth as I can. But if you plan to put this on your menu, you can definitely come up with a measurement that works for you. Like you could say, you know what, I'm gonna do 1.5 times this recipe and it's gonna fit in this square. So you can definitely customize it that way for you. That probably would be the smart thing to do. Um, I just haven't done that yet. All right, I think this is looking pretty good. fills pretty even all the way around. My parchment paper is not wrinkling up. That's why some people like to use the silk pad, because sometimes, like if you look at the back of my parchment paper, there's like little creases in there, and that can impact the dough when it solidifies. It might create a little crack. So you can definitely use a silk pad so that you can avoid it. But this is good. So now I'm going to place this into the refrigerator. I like to put it onto a flat sheet pan so it lays nice and flat. And then you want it to solidify. Then I normally stamp them out with the preferred cookie cutter, and then I throw them back in the refrigerator or the freezer. If I have to do hundreds of these, it's going in the freezer, because this dough can get really soft very fast. And it's a great thing that you can bulk up on. So into the fridge it goes. I'm not going to take it right now. I'll wait a moment. And now let's get into the pate choux. All right, for the pate choux, it's pretty normal of a typical or traditional pate choux. The only difference is I'm adding matcha, because a turtle is traditionally green. So I wanted to use a natural food coloring. You can definitely color your pate choux green if you like, but it does give it a little earthy flavor. The pate choux, I'm not going to say it tastes, it's in your face matcha, but you can definitely taste it. Move my mixer here.
Chef, someone is
Any questions so
asking,
far?
yes, we have a couple. One is, they would like to know the brand of your cooktop.
The brand of my induction.
Your induction.
This is a Galaxy. And I literally just purchased it for my brick and mortar because I opted not to have a stove. And then when I have to worry about getting that hood and all of that, I'm like, most pastry shops that I've worked in the last decade, we actually use induction burners. So it works. I'm able to do everything on here, my pastry creams, my curds, everything.
And then we also have a question about the cracklin and how it holds up to heat and humidity if you're an outdoor farmer's market or if you're doing something outside.
Great question.
Maybe in Florida.
Very good question. That's another reason why I like it, because it holds up very well. Imagine it's like a streusel, if you will. So if you have a crisp, I know it can get soggy, but it normally gets soggy because the moisture coming from the fruit, not because it's getting soggy on its own. So if it's baked properly, it holds up very well. It's more of the filling you have to worry about. That's why I don't do cream puffs outside unless it's a very short event, because once again, it's not the crackling I'm worried about, it's the pastry cream or the mousse or whatever you're filling the cream puff with. But nowadays they have insulated coolers that work very well, so I think it's definitely worth a try. Or wait till the fall time when it's a little cooler, although sometimes that's not the case out here in Florida. All right, so to make my matcha pate choux, I have water here. I have a little bit of sugar and a little bit of salt. Just a little bit. But the crackling topping, I think it holds up much better than dipping them in chocolate. And then I have some butter here as well. And this is normally the foundation for making pate choux. You start with a liquid. I've worked with some chefs where they use milk. I work with some who use milk and water. I find that water works fine for my recipe. It's cheaper. than milk. So I just really think it comes down to what works for you. But water, sugar, salt, butter, that's what I'm starting with in the beginning. I'm going to bring that to a boil. When it comes to a boil, it's very important that the butter is melted as well. So I like to start with softened butter. That way it melts faster. You don't want to start with really cold butter because that water can be boiling, but then you can have chunks of butter. And you don't want that because that means that the water is being cooked off and it's evaporating. So I think it's best to start with softened butter. Give that a little swirl. And then I want to make sure that I have my dry ingredients ready. Well, my flour and my matcha powder. I want to speak briefly about matcha. There's various types of matcha or green tea. For me, the culinary matcha is the best one to bake with because you have ceremonial matcha as well. And that's more for consuming as a beverage or consuming, in your tea, not necessarily cooking with. Hence why culinary matcha, in my opinion, is best for baking. And then there's different brands too, and the price range is different. One of the best brands, which I can't think of the name right now, it's a Japanese brand. I was in Hawaii again, but I was on Lanai at Nobu, and they make this delicious matcha ice cream. The flavors there, the colors there, and it retains that color because matcha, even culinary matcha, it can, I don't want to call it oxidizing, but the color can change over time. I actually threw away a bag because I made a batch yesterday and my turtles, they were like earthy green, like too earthy green. They weren't as like a vibrant green. Although these are not meant to be bright, but I could tell that my matcha, it just ran its course because it didn't look the same color as to when I first purchased it. But a good quality culinary Japanese matcha is going to be your best bet. It is a bit pricey, but I found a couple on Amazon that works pretty well. Even Walmart has a decent brand too. But just keep in mind that culinary matcha is best for making ice creams, making pastry creams, and your pâte choux as well. So it was a very small amount and it came to a boil pretty fast. So I just removed it from the heat for a second. Just give it a swirl, make sure all of that butter is fully melted. And we're essentially making a roux right now. And when it comes to a roux, I like to add my matcha to the roux. Even if I was using freeze-dried fruit powder, I would add it to my roux as well. That's going to help get it fully emulsified and it's going to bring out that flavor. So now that this is coming to a boil, I'm going to dump all of the dry ingredients into the pot. When it comes to the flour, either all-purpose or bread, I've made some recipes with bread flour. Some will argue that it makes it structurally sound, like it gives it more of a crisp exterior. I beg to differ. I think it really comes down to how you bake it, depending on how structurally sound it becomes. But some people like using bread flour. I have all-purpose here. All right, it's at a boil now. So I'm going to add, and this is where the workout comes in. Because you are going to want to stand here and stir and stir and stir. I'm actually going to reduce my heat. And I'm going to work that flour and matcha into the liquid ingredients. Doing my best to remove any lumps. Making sure that this roux is not sticking to the pot. That's another reason why I like reducing the heat. It doesn't need to be at a really, really high flame. And the purpose of this is that we want to remove all of the liquid from this roux. We want to cook out some of that starch as well from the flour. So it's gonna take a couple minutes to do that. And I remember when I first started making pate choux, oh, that was one of my least favorite tasks. I'm not even going to deny it. I remember I went to Johnson and Wales University in Providence, Rhode Island, where I received my bachelor's of science in baking and pastry. And introduction to baking and pastry, we had to make pate choux. And I think I messed up a little bit. It was just, I don't know, it did not click for me in the beginning. And it came down to, I had the roux part, but I was adding my liquid too soon. And it was just a soupy mess, just a soupy mess. But obviously that was many, many, many years ago. And I've learned from my mistakes. And the biggest tip I have is just take the time to get your roux correct. Making sure there's no lumps, making sure you cook it for at least 2 to 3 minutes, but know if you have a bigger batch, you might need 4 minutes. This is a relatively small batch, so you don't need that much time. But just stay with it and get a little workout. So this is looking pretty good.
Chef, are you able to give us a quick peek into the pot?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you.
Can you see it?
Yep.
You can lift it up too. It's like a green mass. And if you saw how it fell from the spatula like that, that's a good sign. If it's thinner than this, I would be questioning it a little bit. Because it shouldn't be pastry cream consistency. It should be a nice thick mass.
Are there any other tricks, knowing doneness with that cooking process of the roux portion?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Do you have any other tricks or tips of knowing when you're done with the cooking process? With pate?
I would say how it all comes together. It shouldn't be sticking to the pot. It should just be a nice thick mass. And it shouldn't stick to anything. Like it's not sticking to the spatula. It's not sticking to my pot. And I don't have a problem saying get a timer. For a small batch like this, at least cook it 2 minutes. If that's what you need to do to make that connection in the beginning, set a timer and look how it appears at that timer, because it needs to be at least 2 minutes. And then I always say, if it falls out of the pot like that, that's a good sign too. It's all together. There's a little bit that I can scrape out, but it's not much at all. And once again, you want to add the matcha to the roux. It won't incorporate very well if you were to add it later on. So now that I have my roux ready, I'm going to take the paddle attachment. I'll move my burner here, and I'm going to swap it out for the mixer. This mixer is old. It was a graduation gift from college, and it's still kicking. Right. And now I'm going to put it onto the mixer. I have it on second speed. You can go to 4 if you like. But we do not want to add our eggs to our roux while it's piping hot. Lukewarm is fine. Even warm you can get away, but it depends on the temperature of your eggs too. I like for my eggs to be at room temperature. And right now, we're just mixing this to cool off the pate choux. Obviously, if you wanted to go faster, you can crank up the speed so that it can cool off faster. I can see steam coming from the bowl right now, so I do not want to add these eggs at the moment. But I'll let it go for a couple minutes, and then I'll gradually add the eggs. Once all of the eggs have been added, I'll stop the mixer, scrape very well, making sure to get in that little divot where egg flakes to settle. And then I'll mix it on speed 2 for a couple minutes, just until the pate choux falls from the paddle, but it falls into itself. And keep in mind that the consistency of the pate choux, it will fluctuate depending on the temperature of your eggs and the temperature of your roux. Right now, obviously, you don't want to add it because it will be too, and it could cook the eggs as well. However, I'll give you an example. This morning, I was making some, and she came in and she wanted to talk about some events, but I already started the roux on the mixer. So by the time I finished talking to her, my roux it was not cold, but it wasn't lukewarm. It wasn't warm. It was colder than what I wanted it to be. But I went ahead and I added my eggs because I knew my eggs were at room temperature. But I could tell that my dough was a little more thicker than it normally is, not because it was made wrong, but just because the temperature is just a little off. But it still worked. I'll show you later. They came out fine. But just know your environment and the temperature of these ingredients will play a role in the final consistency of your choux. And I like to touch the bowl so I can feel what the temperature is. Still on the hot side. But in the meantime, I'm going to get everything ready for piping. When you're first starting out, and even I'll be honest, I've had this conversation with some chef friends. They're like, I would never use a soap pack that has a template. And I'm like, that's you. Sometimes I have my days where I can just type. But I always tell people, don't be afraid to use a template. If you're going for more consistency, or you might have a trainee or an intern, I do not have a problem using a template. So I have that. And then another reason why I like using these templates, because for my crackling, I want my crackling to be the same size as the mound of tapestry that I'm going to pipe. So hypothetically speaking, if this is a 2-inch round, then I want my cutter to be a 2-inch round. No matter what, I always keep my crackling the same size, even if I'm not making turtles. I just find that ratio works very well. I also have 2 round pastry sticks here. One I'm using for its hump, and the other ones I'm using for its head and the legs. Grab my scissors. Almost there. Okay, so I like to get my bags and everything ready. I have my oven preheated. When it comes to baking things, and as I have a new oven here in my space, I've had to like readjust all the temperatures for my recipe because at the end of the day, all of our ovens, they bake differently. So, you know, I find that starting at a lower temperature is better, especially because the pate choux is green. We don't want it to turn brown too fast. So right now, my oven is at 275, but that works with this oven. I've done it in other places and I've had it at 300, 310, 330. So you're going to have to find what works for you, but don't have it at 400. I wouldn't do 350. If you're doing more than 325, by the time they finish baking, you're not going to be able to see that green. It's going to pick up too much color. So I start low so that cracking has the time to melt on the side, melt slowly, and then I may crank it up to about 325. But in the beginning, I start nice and slow. So I have my pastry bag for the body and the pastry bag for its legs. This one is for the filling later. All right, so I'm going to reduce the speed now, and I'm going to gradually add the egg. And I'm gonna show you in a second, but it's still green. I just love how matcha is such a wonderful natural coloring agent. Like there's no food coloring in this at all. In the beginning, it's going to look broken, almost curdled. That's quite normal. That's very, very, very normal. Okay, so let me show you what I have right now. It looks pretty bad. It's like chunks of stuff, a little egg mixture. Doesn't really look so good. That's okay. I'll put it back onto the mixer. I have it on speed 2 right now. And I'm gonna just let it mix until most of the egg has been incorporated. Then I'll stop the mixer and scrape it down. Everyone's doing good? Any questions?
We do have one question. Is there any advantage to add ammonia to the mix?
I'm sorry,
The question is there any advantage to add ammonia to the mix?
ammonia?
Yeah,
No, I haven't heard of that one for Pate Choux.
yeah.
And I wouldn't know what the advantage would be for that because Pate Choux for leavening, it relies on the steam from the oven to cause them to puff up. There's no chemical leaveners in this recipe. It's very, very straightforward. We're incorporating air into the choux itself when we pipe it, but when it goes into the oven, all of the steam in the oven is going to cause it to expand. That's why they're very delicate, and you can't open that door once they're in because then you're allowing that steam to escape, and then they'll deflate on you. So I'll have to look into that and see if that's a thing, but I've never added ammonia to mine. Okay, so now I'm going to scrape.
Do you find that with because I know you don't want to get the color too dark with the bright green turtles, but at that lower temperature, do you find any difference in the expansion of the pate choux?
No, I find that it works better for my oven. And I have the temperature, excuse me, I have the fan low. I do not have the fan high. I find that it takes longer to bake, but that color is going to stay more even and uniform, and they will puff up. They definitely will. Actually, it seems to be more in control because if I had that fan high and I had it at like 375, 350, they will puff up, but they probably won't puff up in a uniform way because sometimes cream puffs, when they don't have that crackling, they look like cabbages and they don't bake evenly. They do puff up, but they don't bake evenly. But that crackling is kind of keeping it in place, if you will. That shell is keeping the pate choux in place, so when it rises slowly, it's more uniform. Great question. Because when I started out making cream puffs, I think we were baking them at 400.
I think
You
that's what
want
I
them
was
really
taught
high,
too,
you
is
want them
really high
really high.
temperatures. Yeah.
But I find when I'm doing crackling, I prefer a lower temperature. The crackling, it spreads better. When that temperature is so high, it just, the crackling, it doesn't have that uniform look. And another tip is if your crackling is frozen and you put it on the pate choux, I find it better to let the crackling thaw on the pate choux before you put it into the oven. Because it's already adhering to where it's going to bake and melt. versus going in a hot oven when it's really cold. It just doesn't bake as you want it.
And then
All right.
with
Welcome
your
to my-
current, oh, pardon me, with your current oven, and doing it at that lower temperature, approximately what does your typical bake time look like?
About 35, 40 minutes.
Okay. Okay.
So this is what I have so far. See how vibrant green it is? I'm gonna just scrape this off and then scrape the bottom, then like maybe mix it for a few seconds. But yes, they take about 35, 40 minutes to bake. But once again, I have mine pretty low. When I made these at IBIE, it was a deck oven and the temperature was 325. But because it was the deck oven, that bottom heat, the top heat, and I wasn't really sure how to use that oven, but they baked really fast and they puffed up really fast. Just making sure I get in the bottom there. Just mix it for a few seconds. With pate choux, another reason why I didn't like making pate choux in school, it was just too sticky and messy. I mean, I would have it everywhere by the time I was done. I used to have to wear these scully hats. I had it in my hat by the time I got out of class. I just remember it just being not fun to handle. But I did have one chef that I met years ago, and he showed me a little trick that I find um, the best way to handle pate choux, especially when you're doing hundreds of these. So I'm going to just show you one real quick. You need some plastic wrap. You just take a piece of plastic wrap. We're essentially making a pouch, if you will. And I love this. It takes, a couple minutes, but my thing is you'll spend more time trying to scrape this into your pastry bag and it's sticking. And I just find this a lot cleaner. And I would just put some of my pate choux in the plastic. Another piece. I try not to make them too big. But since I have two different tips here, make two pouches.
If you're doing this product ahead of time, do you have recommendations for, does it freeze well? And if so, at what stage would you freeze them? What's your process if you are gonna?
My process is I'd rather bake them and then freeze them. I find that they don't puff up as much once they're frozen. They do puff up, but I just think in the beginning, they just puff up nicely. And I've tried it several times. If you do pipe them, I wouldn't put the crackling on it. Just freeze it. But long story short, I prefer to bake them than freeze them. That's what I do with a lot of my pate choux. I've had other recipes where I've tried it and froze it and baked it, and it just never puffed up the way it did initially the first day. So if you do freeze them, just pull them out the night before and then refresh them at a low temperature, maybe like 300, not to rebake them, but just to crisp them back up.
And when you're,
all right,
are you using a traditional freezer or a blast freezer? They work?
Traditional freezer. Yeah. All right, so now I have my pouches. I just cut off one end, place it into my pastry bag with the end cut right down there. And then that way when the pâte choux is done, the plastic will be empty and I just pull out that plastic. And then that way I would have 10 pouches lined up. When one is done, cut, put in, cut, put in, cut, put in. And I just find it's easier to handle. Because once again, me and pâte choux, you can't get along when it comes to keeping it off of me. All right, so now I'm going to pipe the body. Once again, you can use a template or you can just freehand it. So what I'm going to do is press, press, press. I like to space them out a little bit because remember, we have to give them a head, some feet. And I'm literally just pressing until I reach that mound. But if you notice, my tip is not touching the silk pad. I'm leaving a little space because I want to create a mound. If you pipe it really flat like this, you're not going to get that mound that you want from a turtle. So it's important that you just pipe on top of it until, I didn't mean to do that. See, I told you, I just can't work with parachute. I can work with it, but I can't keep it clean sometimes. But you just want to make sure you pipe a nice teardrop or a nice map. So once again, press, press, press. I think I can get one more out of here. Maybe two. Okay. Can you see that? Now I'm going to do the head and its feet. Once again, cut off a little bit of that pouch, place it in, and I have a smaller tip here. This is an 802, and I use well, it says 15 millimeters. They're different brands. But if I had to guess, this is probably like an 806, 808. Okay, so now I'm going to pipe its head. It doesn't matter which side you pick. It's really up to you. And it's relatively small compared to the body. And that's because that's how turtles are made, right? And now I'm going to do the feet. You got one there, and then two in the back. Don't worry about if it has a point right now. We're going to go back and clear up those points for the head and the feet. And once again, it may not look as if I'm piping much, but keep in mind this is going to expand. So I don't want the feet and the head to be the same size. And I try not to put the back feet too close to each other, just spacing it out nicely so that it does have a little room to expand without them touching each other. I'll bring this a little closer so you can see.
They're already looking cute.
Yeah. But that's what we have. And let's say you want the green to be more vibrant or something. Please know you can add some food coloring to it if you want. I would add it to um, the stage after the eggs have been fully incorporated. I wouldn't add the liquid gel to the roux part. I would add it once the eggs have been incorporated. So one thing that I do like to do before I put the crackling on, and this takes me way back to culinary school as well, because remember you had to dip your finger in some water and get rid of the little peaks that you have. I'm not going to do it for the large body part because we're putting the crackling on there, so you don't have to worry about it. But I do want to take care of the heads and the feet. So I just dip my finger in a little bit of water and then just tidy up those points there. And if you accidentally pipe the feet wrong, do know that you can scrape all of this off and repipe it. That's the thing I like about Pate Choux as well, but you want to do it now before it starts forming a crust. But if you pipe one of them wrong or not the right size, just grab a spatula or a bowl scraper and scrape it right back into your bag and you can repipe it. So once again, I'm just cleaning up the feet and the head. I'm not worrying about the body because that crackling is going to get rid of that peak. And I think that's another reason why I like the crackling too. It probably doesn't save time, but I don't know. I just love the fact that I don't have to get rid of those peaks. And for this recipe, you should be able to get at least 15 turtles if you do this size. Oh, one day I should do a really, really big one. I didn't even think to do that.
That'd be so fun.
Maybe for Halloween, I'll do some really big cream puffs. And I know people would just buy it just for fun, but it would taste good. And that's the other thing when I was making these. I'm like, I just want something that looks fun but tastes good too. Because sometimes, people they eat with their eyes and then they're like, oh, it doesn't taste that great. Well, this one tastes good and it looks good. Okay. So now that I've gotten rid of those peaks on the head and feet, I'm gonna go ahead and grab the crackling. I'm gonna just show you how to punch out a couple of them, but I do have some that I punched out already and I put in the freezer just because it's just easier to handle, especially if your kitchen's really warm. They can get soft very, very fast. So here are the ones I punched out. I used this cookie cutter and they're pretty frozen now, so they're easier to handle. And I'm just going to place it on top and just gently press down a little bit, not smash it down, but just to make sure it's not going anywhere. You don't want to smash it because that's going to impact how well it puffs up as well. So once again, right on top, making sure it's secured. So this is what I have now. That crackling is not going anywhere, but I didn't go really heavy and press it down either. I just want to make sure it's secured in place. But as you can see now, the crackling, it's pretty much holding its shape. I don't want to put these into the oven until it starts to droop a bit. That means that it's pretty much going to lay on the sides of it. I find that it bakes better when it does that. So I'm gonna just let them hang out a bit. My oven is up to 1050. Let's see. Yep. Add it in for a second. Probably need more time. But you just grab your cutter and just make sure you press and turn it a bit so that it's cutting all the way through. Sometimes I find that I get better cuts when it's not super, super cold, because when it's really cold, it can be brittle. So I just leave it in the fridge for a couple minutes and then I punch out everything, but I'm not going to try to remove it right now. I would throw this in the refrigerator or the freezer, depending on how much time you have. And I don't remove them from the parchment paper until they're really, really cold. And I would just put this back on top, throw it in the refrigerator. This can be done weeks in advance. Once again, you can make a whole bunch, punch them out, leave them in the freezer. Just don't stack them on top of each other directly. Put parchment paper in between them if you're going to layer it. So back in the fridge it goes. When it comes to filling these, you can fill them with whatever you want. Matcha, it lends itself to a lot of different combinations. You already have two flavor profiles, because you have chocolate from the crackling and then matcha from the Pate. But once again, that matcha flavor is subtle. So if you wanted to do matcha raspberry, you could, or you could do vanilla, you can do more chocolate. The combinations are endless. You can do like a hazelnut, whatever you want. I have some vanilla pastry cream, so I'm gonna fill it with some. So here's an example of how it's starting to droop. Where is it? This one here. See how it's losing its shape? Some of the other ones are gradually doing that as well, but once all of them look that way, then I'll place them into the freezer. Okay. And when they're all done,
So cute.
and if you wanted to get super creative, you can add some eyes to it. You can give it a mouth. You can definitely do whatever you like. But you see how it has that hump? The feet are in proportion to it.
Those are so
But I
fantastic.
find baking them
So much.
slow like that, it still will puff up, but more in a uniform way. And the crackling is nice and tack.
And then Jeff, because we're at time, so I don't want to
Oh,
keep anyone too far over, but when you're filling them, because I know you won't get a chance to fill them, are you just filling them from the bottom?
yep. I just poke a little hole here at the bottom. I have a donut tip filler here.
Mhm.
Once again, I love pouches. So just trim this off. Place it inside. And then once again, I have it pre-poked. I find it easier to pre-poke them. Then just fill it with that pastry cream. Like that. And then pre-poke this one. And you can feel it getting heavier. You can see its belly expanding, if you will. And then just like that. And Here comes the fun part. You gotta eat it, right? It's always weird eating because I'm like, should I tear off its head first? What should I do first? But you can do whatever you want. You always will get a little filling that oozes out. You can always scrape it onto your container or the sheet pan, and then it'll be gone. Sometimes I fill from the top if I'm gonna put like a chocolate plaque there, but I try not to do it with the turtles because it kind of takes away from the look. So this is how it looks when it's done. And once again, you can put eyes and a mouth if you want. It's filled at the bottom. And thank you guys so much for tuning in.
Thank you so much, Chef. This was fantastic. Oh, that looks so good. Thank you so much. And don't forget to check out other events coming up with the Retail Bakers of America at retailbakersofamerica.org. And we will be in touch. All right. Thank you, everyone.